I'm very happy to bring you a conversation with someone we've been trying very hard to get because I was told by more than one person that this is the voice to listen to when it comes to relationships between India and the US and what's going on in the US with the elections right now and what that impact would be and how to read it from a geopolitical and a diplomatic sort of future. I'm joined by Professor Ashutosh Varshney, who joins me right now. Let me do a quick introduction for our audience. Let's pop that up on the screen. Professor Varshney is the sole Goldman Professor of International Studies and the Social Sciences Professor of Political Science at Brown University. He directs the Center for Contemporary South Asia. He's also taught at Harvard before this and the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. He's authored many, many books on India, and you can find them if you do some research. So I recommend that you do some research as well. He teaches mainly about ethnicity, nationalism, political economy of development, and South Asian politics. He's also served on former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan's Millennium Task Force on poverty, and he's been an advisor to the World Bank. So you can tell why I'm so happy that he's made time for us this evening. Professor, thank you so much for making time. It's a pleasure to speak to you in person after reading so much of your work. Professor, you've written about this as well. The fact that, while this election has happened in a year of a pandemic, there's economic, a crisis of sorts. There's also racial unrest in America like we haven't seen for a while. Is this a pushback from those people who were on their way to getting better rights or better equality with the election of Barack Obama, the black voters, the minorities, the Hispanic voters, young people, women? Is the pendulum swinging in the other direction? Is that what we can read of it? Or because it was so close, it's difficult to tell?
Yeah, no, undoubtedly, that was the biggest issue other than the pandemic in this election. Racial equality, racial justice, the place of minorities, racial minorities in this polity. And this year was the most turbulent year since the 1960s on racial issues. And Mr. Trump, while his vote in the Black community and the Hispanic community appears to have gone up a little, just a little, I don't think it shows anything decisive there. And we don't have very disaggregated data yet, race-wise. We don't yet. It'll be some time before we get that data. But there is no doubt that the two most important things on the ballot, if you will, were the race question and the pandemic. And it has to be seen as a vote against his handling of the pandemic by a majority of Americans, though he managed to get to 48% of vote, and vote in favor of a different kind of a more racially equal America. But to the communities you've just listed, the Blacks and the Hispanics and the Asians, you will have to also add a sufficiently large proportion of whites voting against Mr. Trump. I think that's very important to note. It's not that the entire white community is in favor of Mr. Trump. That would be 70% of America, electorally speaking. Demographically, whites are 63% right now, but electorally they're 70%. So in the electorate, they're 70%. So I don't think he has won about 48% of votes. So you can't say that all of whites have been in favor. And in fact, he has lost considerable support in the white community compared to 2016. So many more whites compared to 2016 voted for Mr. Biden and against what Mr. Trump stood for. And they should be, that community, that part of the white community should be added to the communities you listed as favoring a different kind of America, an America that is racially more tolerant, racially more equal, racially more just.
Well, Biden, even in the primaries and after that, talked about how he wanted to bring the country back together. And this is something we're seeing across the world. It's not just in America. where we're seeing a very divided society, people picking opposite ends of every argument, being slotted one way or the other against each other. Specifically speaking of America at this point, how difficult is it going to be for him to bring people together?
Yes, it's going to be one of the biggest challenges, perhaps the biggest challenge for Mr. Biden if he wins, which is very likely. Controlling the pandemic is going to be a lesser challenge because it's well known what to do, and he will listen to science and a great deal more than Mr. Trump did. So we understand how to deal with the pandemic much more than the other challenge, basically trying to heal the wounds, heal the fractures of a very divided nation today. Biden, incidentally, is known for bipartisan conduct. His record in the Senate, more than 40 years of record in the Senate, was about trying to build bridges across the aisle, as they say. So he's had a record of doing so. And almost every statement he has made since the election, even before, but since the election, is aimed at healing America, aimed at trying to bring people together. It's not going to be an easy challenge, no. But all the language, the metaphor, the tone, everything that we have heard from him since the election suggests that to him is the primary goal of the next administration, trying to heal the wounds of a divided nation. And at least an attempt would be required. And I think there will be a very systematic attempt made by the next occupant of the White House. That he understands that is really the biggest challenge America is facing today. The pandemic is the second most important challenge.
You wrote in your recent column that the international significance of this election is also unmistakable. If Joe Biden wins, the US will return to international alliances. Dictators will be embraced less ardently, and human rights will play a role. Trump has also sort of either quarreled with or alienated Europe and some other alliances that the US had. Is it likely that that will come back? And so an anti-China bloc of many countries coming together will become perhaps a larger reality in India's favor?
Yes, I think you're right. There is no doubt that Mr. Trump's emphasis was on bilateralism, not multilateralism. And Biden, every single claim Biden has made about foreign policy is about reviving multilateral alliances. So he will return to the climate treaty. He will return to NATO in a much more forceful way, and he'll return to the Pacific Alliance also. All of that, from which, and he'll return to WHO. WTO is a slightly complicated matter because it is not very obvious, frankly, whether a free trade regime will return now for some time to come. So WTO is a slightly different matter, but there is no doubt in my mind that America would return to multilateralism. And some of that multilateralism would be aimed at China. That's also very clear. That is also, very, very clear.
Would India's, sort of sanctioned trade with Iran be able to come back? Because that was another problem. India wasn't able to do trade with Iran because of what Trump's position was on that matter.
Yeah. So Biden will return to America's earlier commitment to Iran and to the earlier relationship that Obama and Biden and Kerry so carefully cultivated. Yes, they'll return to that. And that also means that India's relationship with Iran is going to be a byproduct of that. It won't be done it won't be done in order to please India. It will be done in order to achieve a strategic objective about which the Obama-Biden administration was very clear and on which they worked so hard. So yes, that will happen. And India will be a beneficiary of the India-Iran relationship will be a beneficiary.
Will be a beneficiary. Is a stronger stance on climate change also something the world can look forward to from the US now?
In order for Biden to take a position in the third presidential debate, which effectively became the second presidential debate against fracking, and even though Pennsylvania has a lot of it, Texas, etc. There are these oil-dependent states, and one or two of which he badly needed. Even despite that, for him to take those positions in the presidential debate, uh, indicates to all of us the commitment that Biden has to the climate change ideas, that how to counter climate change. It's a very well developed program on which he worked under the previous Obama administration. Those ideas have gone further, and the crux of the matter is how to create millions of jobs as the economy shifts from fossil fuels to more sustainable sources of energy. I don't think there's any doubt about that, that Biden administration is committed to that transition from fossil fuels to more sustainable sources of energy, and how to make that happen while creating jobs as opposed to taking away jobs is the challenge. And I think there's a lot of very interesting thinking that has gone into that question when you look at the Biden platform.
Well, one of the things that did come up, Professor, a lot over the last 1 year was, and a little before that, were the idea of visas being handed out to Indians to work in the US, the temporary visas, the H-1B visas. Is it likely that Biden will be protectionist because the US is also going through the crisis that it's going through? Because normally the Republicans are not so protectionist, but Trump seemed to be, though.
Yeah.
What do you expect?
So historically, you're right. Republicans have been more in favor of open trade and an immigration policy which is less restrictive. But Republican politics have been changing over time, and especially under Trump, one could say that United States developed an anti-immigration policy, basically. Anti-immigrant policy. I mean, the way children were treated on the Mexican border, on the U.S.-Mexican border, it is inconceivable that Democrats would have handled that in the same manner, taking away children from their parents and locking them in effectively, in prison, though you can call them child care centers or whatever you want to call them, but taking them away from their parents, right? On the argument that Trump was making and the Trump administration was making, that a lot of people, a lot of Hispanics in Mexico and South of Mexico and Central America, they use children as shields to come to the United States, right? That's the argument. I don't think Democrats can make that argument. They've never made that argument. So you will see a more pro-immigration foreign policy under the likely Biden administration. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You have to say that Trump administration became surprisingly anti-immigrant, though there were some hints of that during his campaign. After all, one of the first things that was widely noted when he started his campaign in 2015 was when he called all Mexicans rapists and criminals.
Yes.
Right? And the biggest source of immigration in America is Hispanic today, and Mexico and South of Mexico, right? And Central America in general. So for him to take that position so openly, and America's First Amendment protects speech. In many other countries in the world, that would have been libel speech, actually. But in America, it is not libel speech. America's First Amendment protects even that form of speech. So yes, the intensity of the anti-immigration turn in a Republican administration was a little surprising, though I think some of it was coming once he campaigned against immigrants in general, especially immigrants from the South of American border.
I want to talk to you about the human rights question, and I'm quoting Kamala Harris here, where she was asked a question about Kashmir, human rights in Kashmir. She said, and I quote, "We have to remind the Kashmiris that they are not alone in the world. We are keeping track of the situation." Do you expect, like you said, that the Democratic Party will have a stand on human rights? But is it possible that India could still respond saying this is an internal matter, as India has done so far?
As India explores a deeper relationship with the United States, which I think it will, this friendship is becoming closer and closer, a closer and closer friendship. It'll also have to respond to some of the concerns of the United States. It cannot be on the basis of what India wants and whether America can supply what India wants. It'll have to be give and take. And I cannot imagine that the Biden administration would not take, at least if not in public, in its diplomatic negotiations with India. I cannot imagine Biden administration not taking a position on Kashmir. It is absolutely central to the way human rights will play a role. But as I said, it would not be a deal breaker because the geopolitical realities will be much more important, much more significant. But India will have to respond. Delhi will have to respond to Washington's concerns about Kashmir. How exactly Delhi does that, it's for Delhi to decide. But I cannot imagine Kashmir not appearing at all in the negotiations between India and United States as they come closer. I cannot imagine that under a Democratic administration. Kashmir played no role in the Trump-Modi relationship or India-US relationship under the Trump-Modi regime. Right? It played no role, but it will play a role. It will not play the most significant role. It will be one set of issues on which there will be an exchange.
There's also the question of Greenpeace, Amnesty International, NGOs in India that have had to close up and leave. The use of sedition laws on students, on protesters. These sort of questions, do you expect that to come up as well? And will India find itself in perhaps in a position where it's having to answer these questions a lot more than it's used to, outside of just Kashmir?
Yeah, human rights rubric of negotiations will contain all of these, but the most important would be Kashmir and the treatment of Muslim minority. Rest will be, so I think in any negotiation, in any diplomatic negotiation, in any other negotiation also, you have to prioritize, right? There are several rubrics in that negotiation. The most important is geopolitical. And then there will be a human rights rubric. And under that also, there will be different priorities. I think Kashmir and treatment of India's Muslim minority would be the most important there. There could be a discussion on whether there can be a national registry of citizens, which will be, or how to have a national registry of citizens, which will not be prejudicial to the Muslim minority after the Citizenship Amendment Act, which has been passed. That's already a fact. But Citizenship Amendment Act does not have as many teeth without a national registry of citizens. That's where it'll acquire teeth. Can there be a national registry of citizens in India which is not injurious to the Muslim community? It will be something that will be discussed, but the most important human rights matter would be Kashmir.
Professor, I'm going to stretch the logic a little bit here, so I'm asking your forgiveness before I get there.
Sure.
We have seen over the last, say, 6 years to a decade, a sort of rise of the far right type of politics across the world. It's not just US, but across the world. Very us versus them, adversarial. The quality of discourse or conversation has perhaps, sort of gone very far away from what we're used to from the heads of state. Everywhere from Malaysia to Brazil, we're seeing a very different kind of politician and politics rise. Is this change in the White House significant in any way to a change around the world? Or is it too early to say so?
I think it's a very, very good question. And many people are thinking about it. I have been thinking about it. I think the far right politics drew a lot of encouragement from who was occupying the White House and how important United States of America is, and the more or less open support that Mr. Trump gave to far right groups in America. Open. It was not a hidden matter. It's not a hidden narrative. It was quite open. When challenged in the debate, presidential debate, on whether he can criticize far right groups and the various conspiracy theory groups in United States politics, he refused to do that. When the far right groups attacked in Charlottesville, Virginia, some 3 years ago, a peaceful protest, he refused to criticize that. He kept saying there are good people on both sides, right? Which is he I told the Proud Boys, this group in on the on the western coast of the United States, perhaps larger than western coast, perhaps with uh, units all over America. We don't know enough about groups like that. When his own Federal Bureau of Investigation, when his own FBI was saying that the greatest threat to peace in the United States is from far right groups, not from far left groups. The greatest threat is far right groups. He didn't listen to his own FBI and ask Proud Boys to stand by and stand back and stand by. Not that I disapprove of what you do. Stand back and stand by on public stage, on a national presidential debate watched by tens of millions of people in America and tens of millions abroad. Yeah, tens of millions abroad. So I think the far right groups, not only in America but all over the world, drew some sustenance from the kind of presidency America has had in the last 4 years, and a change in such a dramatic change in personnel. Um, the Biden administration, which is opposed to virtually everything that Trump has done, on the pandemic, on human rights, on multilateral alliances, on minorities in America, on immigrants in America, on virtually everything, it's exactly the opposite. That's the view, right? So the arrival of an administration of that kind in the White House, I think, will have an effect on far right groups, of course, in America, but also elsewhere. Will weaken them a little. But you are also right to add the caution that perhaps it's too early to say, and let's wait. But they won't get any support from the White House.
Any
That's for sure.
stronger? Yes.
Yeah. They won't get any stronger support from the White House, and perhaps no support from the White House. I think that's a fair comment also. Perhaps no support from the White House. But despite a disapproval from the White House, how far they will go, I think there you're probably right. It's too early to tell, without the approval of the White House for their kind of politics.
I noticed that in your columns, you have also maybe displayed some disappointment in the quality of the conversation, especially the kind of things that you just mentioned. President Trump, during his campaign and even during his presidency, would say publicly Islamophobic, misogynistic, anti-women, so many things that perhaps set a bad example for young people who are watching him. And like I said, across the world, we are witnessing a lot of that. Is this the new normal for politics? Is the whole world going to be divided this way, hateful, angry? Is this something we have to get used to now?
So populism thrives on violation of decency and decorum. It thrives on that. It wants leaders to adopt the language, the streetwise language, as opposed to language bristling with decorum and decency. And a very large number of people in America today are upset with Mr. Trump for that. I don't think that's the main reason he is lost. I don't think that's the issue. The two main reasons are, in my view, and we will have the data a little later, not now. But the best hypothesis about the biggest causes of his defeat are A, the handling of the pandemic, and B, race relations. And the third or fourth or fifth, maybe, among the top five would also be so many Americans finding his behavior extremely objectionable. It's very, very, there's a crassness there. There's a crassness there which upsets a lot of people, and that crassness also appeals to some people. Right. So on crassness per se, I think you will probably get a very divided kind of response in America. But it is, uh, as a general matter, it is true that populist politics thrives on indecency and violation of conventional decorum. And the populist politics is always says that the conventional decorum has protected elites, has served elites, and has hurt the masses on the street. Mm. So, in order to attack the elite, um, you not only have to attack the Khan market and in Delhi or South Mumbai, you also have to privilege a certain street level discourse and politics. So Mr. Trump, in one of the interviews with Hannity, used the F word. It was quite a development noted in some parts, but not noted. He used the F word while giving an interview to Hannity, and about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And Hannity's Fox News show is watched by millions and millions of people. So that was very that actually overjoyed something like that, but was found extremely objectionable by most people that I'm talking about who object to his language don't watch Fox News. They don't watch Fox News, so they didn't know. But I sometimes get notifications, and I got a notification. Therefore, it was used on television. So that's the kind of thing. It really overjoyed Fox News viewers that the president of America doesn't mind using that word on television. See, millions of people use it anyway. What's the problem? Why should the president not use it? Millions of people use that word. So yes, on crassness of language and discourse, on the cheapening of political discourse, the country is very, and not this country alone. A lot of the world is very divided. Wherever populism has acquired force, there is also a very large constituency for cheapening the discourse, because the argument is that an elevated discourse only protects and serves the elite.
So, since we were talking about that, and you did mention Khan market, the truth is that's a conversation that's happening in India as well. So people say that, listen, power was sort of ring fenced around those who accessed very expensive education and those who live in circles of elite, what they call Lutyens Delhi or Khan market Delhi, for example. And as a result, these people also happen to be liberal. But now it's time for the people to take back the power, from these liberal elite, people who sort of who've kept a tight circle of those who can speak English because they studied overseas. Again, is that just populist politics, or is that a change in the way we're thinking as a country? Because I know that you've been examining that change in India as well.
Yeah, so populism certainly is a phase in politics. This is not the first time it's happening. It's happened before in various parts of the world. The most heavily studied, most extensively studied forms of populism are in South America, in Latin America, and Europe also, incidentally. Populism was a fairly important phase in American politics in the late 19th century. It was. Populism has been a very important phase at the state level politics in Louisiana and many other states. It's been. So it's a phase that comes and goes. I don't think it's here forever. I don't think so. Because what weakens populism is not necessarily the discourse, though some people would be upset by the discourse, not necessarily that. What weakens populism is the inability to solve problems of society, right? It's inattention to serious policy issues, which are absolutely important for solving collective problems of a society. There's almost an anti-policy discourse in populist circles. That you can announce demonetization without a discussion for 6 months. Something as large as that, you can just announce it at 8 p.m. one night on television, right? As opposed to going through a serious discussion and in newspapers, on television, in Lok Sabha, in Rajya Sabha. And this is true of a lot of politicians of that variety who just announce the number of announcements Mr. Trump has made, on impulse, on the belief that I know I'm right, without a proper discussion of that, right? So that kind of approach to policy matters does not solve collective problems. You can still survive politically for quite some time, but it's always a phase. Ultimately, problems will have to be solved. And ultimately, therefore, public policy, government policy will have to be taken as a serious matter to be discussed in detail, and then a judgment arrived at after adequate discussion. So I think what will hurt and what has hurt populism in the past also is precisely this: its inability to take policy seriously and inability to solve problems beyond elitism, etc. Yes, its attack on elitism is common to all forms of politics.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for giving us so much time and being so patient with the questions that I had for you. And I do hope we can talk again as this change progresses.
It was very good to be with you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.